I'm Rose, 31 female. I live alone in a 3-bedroom house that I designed and built for myself, working from home as a data analyst. It's a quiet life, a peaceful one, but that peace was hard-won from the ashes of a family that tried to burn me down. This is the story of how my own brother, manipulated by his wife, threw me out onto the street based on a lie, and how years later, when they came knocking on my door, homeless and desperate, I had to make the hardest decision of my life. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. 7 years ago, my life was a chaotic tapestry of shared spaces and compromised dreams. I was 24, fresh out of university with a degree in statistics and a low-paying internship that barely covered my student loans. My parents had passed away a few years prior, leaving the modest family home to my older brother, Mark, and me. It was a legal 50-50 split, but Mark, already married to Sarah with a baby on the way, was living there. It only made sense for me to move in, too. We'd de-sell it one day, we agreed, but for now, it was a practical solution. I could save money, he could have help with the bills, and we could maintain the last piece of our parents we had left. The arrangement worked at first. I adored my new nephew, Jacob, and tried my best to be a helpful sister and aunt. I paid my half of the mortgage and utilities religiously, cleaned up after myself, and often babysat for free so Mark and Sarah could have a night out. Mark worked as a car salesman, a job that relied heavily on commission and charm, which meant our household income was a roller coaster. Sarah had quit her job as a receptionist to be a full-time mom. I understood the financial strain they were under, so I never complained, even when my half of the expenses started to feel more like 70%. Just until I get that big end-of-year bonus, Rosie, Mark would say with a wink. Then I'll make it all right. Sarah was a more complicated story. On the surface, she was sweet, always calling me honey and praising my cooking. But there was an undercurrent I couldn't ignore. It was in the way her smile never quite reached her eyes when I announced my internship had become a full-time job. It was in the subtle digs about my expensive work clothes, which were just a few nice blouses I'd bought from a thrift store. She would often borrow things from my room without asking, a necklace, a book, a bottle of perfume, and they would either reappear weeks later, broken, or not at all. When I'd gently bring it up, she would feign innocence. "Oh, honey, I'm so sorry. With Jacob, my brain is just scrambled eggs. I have no idea where it could be." Mark, for his part, was blind to it all. He saw Sarah as the perfect wife and mother, the anchor of his life. Any minor issue I raised was dismissed as me being too sensitive or not understanding the pressure she's under. The house, while technically half mine, began to feel less like a home and more like a space I was grudgingly allowed to occupy. My bedroom became my sanctuary. I spent most of my evenings there, studying for professional certifications to advance my career, headphones on to block out the sounds of their arguments, which were becoming more frequent. Their fights were almost always about money. The whispers would start after they thought I was asleep, hushed, angry tones seeping through the thin walls. Sarah's voice, sharp and accusing, Mark's defensive and weary. Despite the growing tension, I held on. This was my family. This was my home. I told myself it was temporary. I was saving every penny I could. My career was on an upward trajectory, and I was quickly gaining a reputation at my firm for being meticulous and insightful. I had a 5-year plan: build up my experience, get a promotion, save for a down payment, and buy my own small condo. I just had to weather the storm in the family home for a little while longer. I had no idea that the storm was about to turn into a hurricane, with me at its center. The fragile peace was predicated on my willingness to be small, to be accommodating, to be less. The moment I started to have a future of my own, the whispers in the walls began to take my name. The shift was subtle at first, like a change in the atmospheric pressure before a storm. It began with misplaced items escalating from trinkets to things of actual value. $100 I was certain I'd left in a drawer vanished. Sarah suggested I was becoming forgetful. "You work so hard, Rose," she'd said, patting my arm with faux sympathy. It's no wonder you can't keep track of things. Then came the comments about my lifestyle, veiled as concern. Sarah would talk to Mark in the kitchen, her voice just loud enough for me to hear from the living room. I'm just worried about Rose. She's out so late sometimes. And that friend of hers, Emily, she seems a bit wild. Emily, my best friend since college, was a quiet graphic designer who considered a wild night to be binging a new TV series with a pint of ice cream. The one time I'd been out late, it was because I'd worked until 10 p.m. to meet a project deadline. The real campaign began when I got my first big promotion. I was no longer an intern or a junior analyst. I was an official data analyst, and it came with a significant pay rise. I was ecstatic. I came home with a bottle of champagne to celebrate with them. Mark gave me a big hug, genuinely proud. "That's my little sister," he boomed. "Knew you had it in you." Sarah's reaction was different. She smiled, but it was thin and brittle. "That's wonderful, honey," she said, her eyes scanning my new, more professional suit. "I guess that means you'll be able to help out a little more around here, now that you're making the big bucks." The champagne suddenly felt heavy in my hand. The moment wasn't about celebrating my success, it was about calculating her benefit. From that day on, the whispers weren't just about me being forgetful or wild, they were about me being selfish. I started overhearing snippets of conversations. "She just bought a new laptop, but I had to use expired coupons at the grocery store," Sarah would sigh to Mark. "The laptop was a requirement for my job, and I'd paid for it with my own money." Another time, I heard her telling Mark, I'm at home all day with Jacob, and Rose just comes and goes as she pleases." She has no idea what real responsibility is. The poison she was dripping into my brother's ear started to work. Mark's attitude toward me soured. He stopped asking about my day. Our easy, joking conversations were replaced by a tense silence. He started siding with Sarah on everything. If I mentioned that the utility bill seemed unusually high, he'd snap. "Well, you're the one in your room with the lights and computer on all night." I was studying, building the career that was keeping our shared finances afloat, but that fact seemed to be forgotten. The most insidious part of Sarah's strategy was how she used their financial problems as a weapon against me. She knew Mark was proud and hated feeling like he couldn't provide for his family. So, she framed my financial independence not as a help, but as a judgment. She would tell him things like, "Rose probably thinks we're failing. Look at her, so successful. She probably looks down on us." She was masterfully weaving a narrative where I was the arrogant, ungrateful sister, and they were the struggling, virtuous victims. My friend Emily saw it clearly. "She's jealous, Rose," she told me over coffee one weekend, my one escape from the oppressive atmosphere of the house. "You have a career, you have freedom. You're building a life for yourself, and she's feeling trapped. She's not just jealous, she's threatened by you." I knew Emily was right, but I didn't know what to do. How do you fight whispers? How do you defend yourself against accusations that are never made to your face? I was living in a house that was legally half mine, but emotionally, I was an intruder. I started retreating further into myself, focusing on my work and my savings plan. My goal of leaving in 5 years was fast-tracked. I started aiming for 2. I just had to hold on. But Sarah wasn't going to give me 2 years. She was about to escalate her campaign of whispers into a full-blown declaration of war. The catalyst for my exile was, ironically, an act of generosity. Our parents had left behind a few pieces of valuable jewelry, including our mother's diamond engagement ring. It was kept in a safe deposit box, and the agreement between Mark and me was clear. It was a family heirloom, to be passed down, not to be sold unless we both agreed and were in dire circumstances. One Tuesday evening, Mark came to me, his face etched with worry. He looked older than his years, the stress of his finances and Sarah's influence weighing him down. "Rosie," he started, unable to meet my eyes. "Sarah and we're in a tough spot, a really tough spot. We're behind on the car payment, and a couple of medical bills for Jacob came in." He explained that he'd had a terrible sales month and they were sinking. Then he dropped the bomb. "We were thinking about Mom's ring." My stomach clenched. "Mark, no, we promised. That ring is the one thing." I know, he cut in, his voice pleading. But this is an emergency. It would just be a loan. We'd use it as collateral, get a small loan, and pay it back as soon as my commission check comes in next month. The ring would be safe. I was hesitant. Every instinct screamed at me to say no. I didn't trust Sarah, and I was beginning to lose trust in the brother I once knew. But looking at his desperate face, the face of the boy who had taught me to ride a bike and protected me from bullies, I caved. "Okay, Mark," I said softly, "but this is a one-time thing. We get it back next month, no excuses." He hugged me, relief washing over his features. "Thank you, Rosie. You won't regret this." Those words would haunt me for years. The next day, we went to the bank together and retrieved the ring. I handed it to him, a knot of dread in my chest. He promised to keep me updated. For a week, things seemed better. The tension in the house eased slightly. Mark was more cheerful, and even Sarah gave me a genuine-looking smile. I allowed myself to hope that maybe this was the turning point. The hope was shattered a week later. I came home from work to find Mark and Sarah sitting on the living room couch, their faces like stone. My bags, 2 large suitcases and a few cardboard boxes, were packed and standing by the front door. "What's this?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark stood up, his expression a mixture of fury and pain. "How could you, Rose? How could you do this to us?" "Do what? I have no idea what you're talking about." Sarah started to cry, a theatrical, self-pitying sound. "The ring, Rose, the ring is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" I looked at Mark, confused. "You took it for the loan." Mark shook his head, his eyes blazing. "Don't lie, don't you dare lie to my face. The loan company called. They said the diamond was a fake, a worthless piece of glass." The floor seemed to drop out from beneath me. "A fake? That's impossible. We got it from the safe deposit box together." Sarah's voice rose, thick with accusation. "You must have switched it. You must have a gambling problem or debts we don't know about. You took our mother's ring, sold it, and replaced it with a fake to cover your tracks." It was so ludicrous, so utterly disconnected from reality that I almost laughed. But the look on my brother's face stopped me. He believed her. After all the whispers, all the poison she had dripped in his ear, this was the final, masterstroke lie he was ready to swallow whole. "Mark, that's insane," I pleaded, turning to him. "You know me, I would never ever do that. Sarah is lying." "Stop blaming my wife," he roared, his voice cracking. "She's been worried about you for months. Your secrets, your late nights, it all makes sense now. You've been stealing from us, and this was the final betrayal." I was stunned into silence. He had been so perfectly primed for this lie that he didn't even question its absurdity. He didn't ask for proof. He didn't consider the source. He just accepted it. The sister-in-law who borrowed things constantly versus the sister who had been paying more than her share of the bills for 2 years. He chose to believe her. "I want you out," he said, his voice cold and final. "I can't even look at you. Get your things and get out of our parents' house. You are not welcome here anymore." "Mark, please," I begged, tears streaming down my face. "This is my house too. You can't just kick me out." "I can and I am," he said, pointing a shaking finger at the door. "You have 1 hour to get anything else you need. Then I'm changing the locks. Don't ever come back." He turned his back on me, wrapping a protective arm around Sarah, who was sobbing into his shoulder, her eyes peeking at me over the top with a look of pure, malevolent triumph. I was homeless, exiled from my own home, disowned by my only brother, all based on a lie so outrageous it was brilliant. As I dragged my suitcases down the driveway, the full weight of the betrayal hit me. It wasn't just about the house or the ring. It was about my brother. He had chosen her, and in doing so, he had erased our entire history, our shared blood, our parents' memory. Standing on that curb with everything I owned in a few bags, I didn't feel sadness. I felt a cold, hard resolve crystallize in my heart. They had destroyed my past. I would not let them have any part of my future. That first night was a blur. I called the only person I knew I could count on, Emily. Her voice, filled with immediate, unquestioning fury on my behalf, was a lifeline in the darkness. "You're coming to my place," she said, no room for argument. "Right now." I ended up on her couch for 2 months, a refugee from a war I hadn't known I was fighting. The first few weeks were the hardest. I was a ghost haunting Emily's small apartment, replaying my brother's words, seeing Sarah's triumphant smirk. The betrayal was a physical weight, making it hard to breathe, to eat, to think. Emily was my rock. She let me cry, she let me rage, and most importantly, she made me see the truth. "This isn't your fault, Rose," she said fiercely one night, forcing a bowl of soup into my hands. "You were a threat to her. Your success made her feel small, so she had to get rid of you. Mark is a fool and a coward for believing her, but this was her game from the start." Her words helped shift my perspective from grief to anger, and from anger to action. I had a good job, I had savings, and I had my skills. They had taken my home, but they couldn't take my future. I threw myself into my work with a singular, burning focus. The complex puzzles of data and code were a welcome refuge from the messy, illogical chaos of human emotion. My work didn't lie. It didn't manipulate. It was based on facts and evidence, and I was very, very good at it. My manager noticed my increased output and dedication. Within 6 months, I was leading a small team. The pay increase was substantial. Living frugally at Emily's, I was able to save money at an astonishing rate. The 5-year plan for a condo became a 2-year plan for a house. But I knew I couldn't stay in the same city. The thought of running into Mark or Sarah at a grocery store was unbearable. I needed a clean break, a geographical severing to match the emotional one. My company had a liberal remote work policy, so I started looking at cities a few hours away, far enough for a new start, close enough to drive to the main office once a month if needed. At the same time, I took a crucial step. I hired a lawyer. I explained the situation. I was a legal 50% owner of a property from which I had been illegally evicted. My lawyer sent Mark a formal letter, stating my rights and proposing a buyout. I didn't want the house back. I wanted my share, my freedom. The response was a furious, rambling letter from Mark, dictated by Sarah's venom, accusing me of trying to extort them after what I'd done. He refused to sell and refused to buy me out. "Fine," my lawyer said calmly. "We'll file a partition lawsuit. The court will force the sale of the property and split the proceeds. It will be expensive and messy for him, but you will get your money." The legal threat worked. Faced with the reality of a court-ordered sale, Mark reluctantly agreed to a buyout. It took nearly a year of bitter negotiations, during which they tried to lowball me at every turn, claiming the house needed repairs and updates to devalue my share. I held firm. I knew what the house was worth. In the end, I walked away with a check that represented my half of the equity. It wasn't a fortune, but combined with my savings, it was more than enough. 2 years after being kicked out, I bought a plot of land in a quiet, up-and-coming town 3 hours away. With Emily's design help and a trusted local builder, I spent the next year building my own home from the ground up. Not a condo, not a starter house, but my dream home. A 3-bedroom house with a large home office, a garden, and big windows that flooded the space with light. Every nail, every paint color, every fixture was my choice. It was a fortress built not of anger, but of independence. During these years, I heard nothing from my family. I had blocked Mark and Sarah on all social media and changed my number. Emily was my only link, and she only relayed information if it was critical. I knew from her that they'd had a second child, a girl named Sophia. I also knew that Mark's career at the car dealership had stalled. His charm was wearing thin, and his income remained erratic. They were living on a knife's edge, struggling to manage the full mortgage of a house they had stolen. I felt a distant, cold pang of something that wasn't quite pity. It was the detached observation of a predictable outcome. By the time I turned 31, my life was unrecognizable. I was a senior data analyst, respected in my field, earning a 6-figure salary. I had my beautiful home, a circle of new friends, and a peaceful, stable life. The wound of my brother's betrayal had scarred over. It was a part of my history, a foundational story of how I became the woman I was, but it no longer had the power to hurt me. I had built a life so solid and bright that their darkness couldn't touch it. I thought that chapter was closed forever. I was wrong. The past was about to come knocking, literally, at my front door. The call came on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. It was an unknown number, and I almost let it go to voicemail, as I usually did. But something made me answer. Hello. Rose, is that you? The voice was hesitant, strained. It took me a second to place it. It was Mark. After 5 years of absolute silence, hearing his voice was like being struck by lightning. I didn't say anything. Rose, please, he said, his voice cracking with a desperation I remembered all too well. I need your help, we need your help. My own voice, when it finally came, was cold and steady. I have nothing to say to you, Mark. I made a move to hang up. Wait, he shouted, a raw panic in his tone. Please just listen, we're in trouble, big trouble, we lost the house. I froze, the phone pressed against my ear. Lost the house. The house that was half mine, the house he had kicked me out of. He continued, the words tumbling out in a frantic rush. The bank foreclosed. We were behind on payments for months. My job. I lost it a while back. I've been doing gig work, but it's not enough. Sarah, we have nowhere to go, Rose. We're staying at a cheap motel, but our money runs out tomorrow. We have the kids. We have nothing. I pictured it instantly. My brother, his pride stripped away. Sarah, her manipulative sweetness curdled into fear. And my nephew and niece, Jacob and Sophia, children I barely knew, caught in the middle of their parents' failure. A wave of conflicting emotions washed over me. A grim, vindictive satisfaction, followed immediately by a surge of guilt. These were my brother's children. My blood. What do you want from me, Mark? I asked, my tone flat. Can we just stay with you? Just for a little while, he begged. Just until we get back on our feet. A week, maybe 2, I swear that's all. We have nowhere else to turn. Everyone else. They've shut the door on us. Of course they had. Mark had likely burned every bridge he had with his arrogance and Sarah with her toxic behavior. They had run out of people to use, and now they had come back to the person they had wronged the most, assuming that the ties of family would be a trump card they could play. How did you get my number? I asked, sidestepping his plea. Emily, he admitted. I called her, begged her. She didn't want to give it to me, but I told her the kids were sleeping in the car. She gave in. I made a mental note to call Emily later, not with anger, but with understanding. She had always had a soft spot for kids. I was silent for a long moment, the sound of the rain against my office window filling the space. He thought he could just reappear after 5 years and I would open my home to him, to her. The audacity was breathtaking. After accusing me of being a thief, a liar, a degenerate gambler. After throwing me out on the street without a second thought. He was asking to stay in the very house that my success, the success they resented and tried to sabotage, had built. I'll think about it, I said finally, the words tasting like ash. I'll call you back. I hung up before he could reply. My hands were shaking. My beautiful, peaceful home suddenly felt vulnerable, threatened. I walked through the quiet, spacious rooms, my footsteps echoing on the hardwood floors. This was my sanctuary, a place built on my own resilience and hard work. The thought of Sarah walking these halls, judging my furniture, her presence poisoning the air, made my skin crawl. The thought of Mark, with his weak will and practiced excuses, sleeping under my roof felt like a violation. But then I thought of Jacob and Sophia. They were innocent. They didn't deserve to be homeless because of their parents' disastrous choices. Was it my responsibility to save them? Was my refusal to help a punishment directed at Mark and Sarah, or was it also a punishment for the children? The conflict raged inside me. The part of me that had been that scared 24-year-old girl on the curb wanted to say no, to slam the door in their faces as they had done to me, to give them the justice they deserved. But the woman I had become, the one who valued stability and compassion, was torn. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, unable to work. I pulled up old photos on my computer, pictures from before Sarah. Me and Mark as kids, grinning, missing teeth. Our parents, young and happy. A whole life, a whole family that now felt like a fiction. He had made his choice 5 years ago. He had chosen his wife's lies over his sister's truth. He had set the terms of our relationship. Now, he was asking me to forget those terms because it was convenient for him. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was asking for a free room. By evening, the rain had stopped. The sky was clear and filled with stars. And in the cold, clear light of that night, I knew what I had to do. It wasn't about revenge, and it wasn't about forgiveness. It was about truth. Before I made any decision, they were going to hear the unvarnished truth, and I was going to get the one thing they had never given me: an answer. I called Mark back the next morning. My voice was calm, devoid of the turmoil that had raged within me the day before. "I'm not going to give you an answer over the phone," I said. "Meet me. There's a diner off the highway, about halfway between my city and yours. Noon, come alone." "Alone?" he asked, a hint of panic in his voice. "Sarah will want to." "Alone, Mark," I repeated, my tone leaving no room for negotiation. "If you want my help, you'll be there. Alone." He agreed. I spent the morning preparing, not my house for guests, but myself for a confrontation 5 years in the making. I didn't dress to impress, I dressed as myself. Comfortable jeans, a simple sweater. My power wasn't in my clothes or my house anymore, it was in the quiet confidence I had earned. I got to the diner early and chose a booth in the back corner. When Mark walked in, I almost didn't recognize him. The swaggering charm of the car salesman was gone. He looked tired and defeated, his shoulders slumped, his face pale. He looked like what he was, a man who had lost everything. He slid into the booth opposite me, avoiding my eyes. "Thanks for coming," he mumbled. I didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Before we talk about your current situation, we need to talk about the past. I have one question for you, Mark, and I want an honest answer. It's the only thing I'll ask for. Why did you believe her?" He flinched as if I'd struck him. "Rose, can we not?" "No," I said firmly. "We can. I have spent 5 years wondering how my own brother could believe I was capable of stealing from our family, of desecrating our mother's memory. So you are going to tell me. Why?" He stared down at the tabletop, his hands trembling slightly. He was silent for a long time. I waited. I had waited 5 years, I could wait a few more minutes. Finally he spoke, his voice thick with shame. "I don't know," he whispered. "That's not good enough," I shot back, my voice sharp. "Try again." He looked up, and for the first time I saw tears welling in his eyes. "Because I was a coward," he said, the words choked. "I was failing, Rose. I wasn't making enough money. I felt like a loser. Sarah, she kept saying how you were judging us, how you looked down on me because you were so successful and I was struggling. She painted this picture of you as this secret, arrogant person who thought she was better than us." He took a shaky breath. "When she came up with the story about the ring, a part of me, a small, ugly part of me, wanted to believe it. Because if you were the bad guy, then I wasn't the failure. If you had done something monstrous, it explained everything. It made me the victim. It made me the good husband protecting his wife from his evil sister. It was easier to believe a crazy lie than to face the simple truth that I was failing my family and I was jealous of my little sister's success." The confession hung in the air between us, raw and pathetic. It was everything I had suspected, but hearing him admit it was like lancing a wound. It was ugly, it was weak, and it was, finally, the truth. "So you destroyed our family," I said, my voice quiet but cutting. "You threw me out of my own home, you let your wife steal from me and slander my name, all to protect your own fragile ego." He broke down then, sobbing into his hands. "I'm so sorry, Rose. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I should have trusted you. I should have seen what she was. Living with her. After you were gone, her poison didn't stop. It just turned on me. Nothing was ever her fault. It was my boss's fault, the economy's fault, my fault. I see it now. I see everything. But it's too late." I let him cry. I felt a strange sense of detachment. The apology I had craved for years was finally here, but it didn't bring the relief I expected. It was a deathbed confession from a relationship that had died long ago. "And the ring?" I asked, my voice clinical. "What really happened to it?" He wiped his eyes, looking miserable. "She sold it," he admitted. "The real one. She took it the day after we got it from the bank. She told me she was taking it to the loan place, but she went to a pawn shop instead. Got cash. The story about it being a fake, she made it all up after the money was gone and she knew I'd be asking questions. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. It was even more brazen than I had imagined. "So," I said, leaning back in the booth, the picture now crystal clear. "You let your wife's lies and your own jealousy and weakness drive you to ruin. You lost our parents' home. You're unemployed. You have 2 children you can't provide for. And now you've come to me, the person you wronged, to clean up your mess. Is that about right?" He could only nod, his face buried in his hands. I took a deep breath. "Here's what's going to happen," I said, and for the first time he looked up, a desperate flicker of hope in his eyes. "I am not going to let you or Sarah step 1 foot inside my house. My home is a sanctuary, and you two are not welcome in it. That door is permanently closed to you." The hope in his eyes died, but the kids, he whispered. "The children are another matter," I continued, my voice hard. "They are innocent. I will not let them suffer for your mistakes. I will pay for you to stay in your motel for 1 month, not a day more. That gives you 30 days to find a job, any job. I will also pay the security deposit and first month's rent on a small 2-bedroom apartment. I will have groceries delivered for that month. I will do this for Jacob and Sophia, not for you." I slid a piece of paper across the table. "This is the name of a financial counselor. I will pay for your first 3 sessions. You need to learn how to manage money, and you need to deal with the mess you've made of your life. This is not a gift, Mark. It's a final transaction. This is the last thing I will ever do for you. After this month, you are on your own. Do you understand?" He stared at me, his mouth agape. He had come begging for a handout, a place to crash. Instead, I had given him a lifeline, but one with firm, unyielding boundaries. It was help, but it wasn't a reunion. It was charity, but it wasn't forgiveness. He nodded slowly. "I understand," he said, his voice hoarse. "Thank you, Rose." "Don't thank me," I said, standing up and putting on my coat. "Thank the woman you created. When you threw me out on the street, you forced me to become strong enough to survive anything, including you. You're getting this help not because you're my brother, but because I refuse to be the kind of person you are." I walked out of the diner without looking back, leaving him alone in the booth with the unvarnished truth and the consequences of his choices. I was true to my word. That afternoon, I made the arrangements. I called the motel and paid for a month. I found a decent, no-frills apartment complex in his area and contacted the landlord, explaining I would be covering the initial costs for a family member. I set up a recurring grocery delivery service. I did it all with the detached efficiency of a project manager handling a difficult account. There was no emotion involved, only logistics. Mark sent me a single text that evening. "I told Sarah, she's not happy, but we're taking the deal. I don't have words to say how sorry I am or how thankful." I didn't reply. There was nothing left to say. The next month was quiet. I went back to my life, my peaceful home, my demanding job, but there was a difference. A weight I hadn't even been fully aware I was carrying had been lifted. It wasn't that I had forgiven him, I hadn't. Forgiveness felt like a placid lake, and my feelings were more like a calm, cold sea. What I had was closure. I had faced the monster of my past and found it to be a small, pathetic man. I had spoken my truth, and in doing so, had taken back the last bit of power he and his wife held over me. Emily called me, worried. "Are you okay? I never should have given him your number." "It's okay, Em," I told her, and I meant it. "It's what I needed. It's over now, really over." About 3 weeks into the month, I got an email from an address I didn't recognize. The subject line was "You owe us more." It was from Sarah. It was a long, rambling tirade that was equal parts pathetic and venomous. She accused me of being smug and cruel, of flaunting my wealth. She claimed that the apartment I de-arranged for was beneath them, and that I should have just let them move in with me. "It's the least you could do after what you put this family through," she wrote. The delusion was staggering. She still saw herself as the victim. She ended the email with a threat. "Family is supposed to take care of family. If you cut us off, you will regret it. We know where you live." 5 years ago, that threat would have terrified me. Now I just felt tired. I didn't reply. Instead, I forwarded the email to a new contact in my phone, my security consultant. The next day, a state-of-the-art security system, complete with cameras and motion sensor lights, was installed at my house. It was another wall in the fortress I had built, a practical solution to an emotional problem. At the end of the month, I ceased all payments as promised. The grocery deliveries stopped. The motel key would no longer work. Their new apartment was waiting, but from now on, the rent was their responsibility. I got a call from Mark on the 31st day. It went straight to voicemail. "Rose, please," the message said, his voice frantic again. "We need a bit more time. I have a job interview next week, but nothing is certain. Sarah is saying we should just come to your house. Please just call me back." I deleted the voicemail without a second thought. I had drawn a line in the sand, and I would not allow them to cross it. My help had been a tool to get the children into a stable home, not a bridge back into my life. I never heard from them again. Through Emily, I heard bits and pieces. Mark did get a job, working in the stockroom of a big box store. It was humbling, low-paying work, but it was a start. They moved into the apartment I had secured for them. Life was hard. Sarah, faced with the reality that she couldn't manipulate her way into an easy life, was apparently forced to get a part-time job in the evenings. Their relationship, from what Emily could gather, was tense and fragile, held together only by necessity and their children. I sometimes think about my nephew and niece, Jacob and Sophia. I hope they're okay. I hope their father's newfound humility and their mother's forced dose of reality makes them better parents. Perhaps one day, when they're older and can understand, I might reach out to them. But their parents, Mark and Sarah, are ghosts to me now. They are part of the stow. Wry of who I was, not who I am. My house remains my sanctuary. It is quiet, it is peaceful, and it is mine. Every day I wake up in this life I built, not from spite, but for myself. The final door is closed. Not slammed in anger, but locked, firmly and forever, with the quiet, unshakable strength of a woman who knows her own worth. I didn't get revenge in the fiery way you see in movies. I got something better. I got a life they can never touch.